more than a year, Nebraska has featured promising conditions in the weekly U.S. Drought Monitor. In fact, since June 23rd of 2015, the state has never placed more than 3% in moderate or D1 drought. But one of the drier areas has been north of here in the northwestern corner of the state. Scottsbluff itself has received just more than 1.5 inches of precipitation since June 1st, only 40% of normal for the time frame. On Tuesday afternoon, we spoke with Nebraska Extension's Berger, roughly 45 miles south of here in Kimball County, to learn about pasture and range conditions in western Nebraska. We started by asking about rainfall events for this area through late spring into summer.
So in the western panhandle, April, May was pretty good for precip, especially in the southern half of the panhandle. You get in northern panhandle and northern counties, they got a little dry, especially toward mid to late May. As we moved into June, I still had some precip, became more spotty in the panhandle. That northern panhandle is starting to show some effects of some dry conditions and feeling the stress. South panhandle really depends on where you're at, whether or not you caught a good shower or not. Still green in many places, but these warm conditions are starting to dry things out.
In the areas that are stressed and with heat setting in this week, at least in this part of the state, what does that do to the quality of pastures and ranges?
Yeah, so in many parts of the panhandle especially, we're going to have adequate forage from a quantity standpoint. What's happening now though is we're starting to see those grasses mature, and so quality is starting to be on the decrease. So that presents some challenges for us, especially for those who are later calving, moving into breeding season in late June or late July and early August, especially on young cows and replacement heifers. May want to think about some strategic supplementation, say 2 weeks prior to and through the first 30-40 days of the breeding season. 2 pounds of 30% type cube will provide some protein and energy to maybe boost conception rates on especially those females that are still growing.
This point in the season, what benefit does rain have?
Yeah, so from a rain standpoint, we keep the warm season grasses still kind of green. In terms of growing lots of additional forage, we'll get some response from some of our short warm seasons like buffalo and blue grama. Our warm seasons, it's going to have limited benefit from now on. Any rain we get from now through August, early September, really is going to benefit those cool season grasses. It'll start to come back in that early September time frame. That's going to be really the most benefit to us actually coming in the 2017 growing season.
In the areas that could be kind of tough, what are the pros and cons of early weaning?
Yeah, so I think for guys who are maybe starting to get a little short on forage, some pros of early weaning, obviously right now harvested forages or a grain is a pretty competitive option from an economic standpoint. Distillers grains, things like that can be bought pretty reasonably, and so we can put together a diet that's pretty competitive to feed that early weaned calf. The advantage to the cow is that we stop lactation, drastically reduce her nutrient requirements, and also we're just going to reduce demand on pasture. So that's some advantages. You know, disadvantage is that we're going to maybe need to bring those calves into an environment where it might be dry and dusty rather than have them out on pasture. We can work around that and do some things management wise, but it is going to require you have some facilities and some things to get that done, or work with a feed yard that can do it.
We've talked about this before, but how efficient can dry lining be?
Dry lining can be a really efficient tool in terms of managing a cow-calf pair or managing them separately. Especially when we look at feed costs right now, the value of corn, value of hay, it's really a competitive option and one that we can really work quite competitively under current market conditions.
Are there any weed control issues that you've heard from producers around the area?
So I think after the drought, and I realize it's been 3 years, but we're still seeing some impacts of the drought in terms of the plant community. A lot of native type annuals that have showed up, mare's tail, spiny leaf thistles, some of those have been popping up, things like 6-week fescue, and sometimes concern by producers. So when we have native plants, I really caution folks around using any kind of herbicide control on those. I think it's really a cyclic type scenario where we have a lot of those. In a couple years, they'll kind of go back and disappear again for the most part. So I think being cautious with that. From weed control standpoint, as we think about thistles, a lot of those now are in a heading stage. Getting after those is a challenge at this point from a herbicide control. Our most effective control on these thistles, especially these noxious invasive ones, is actually going to come this fall in the rosette stage in that mid-September on time period when they're actually starting to translocate and move nutrients back down in their root system to get ready for the next year. So from a control standpoint, that's the most optimum time to have an impact.
To make sure I understand then, those weeds that you said could be cyclical, there's no need to control?
You know, I really get cautious about trying to control a native annual and plants that are here as part of the natural ecosystem. Now, any invasive type species, we want to be aggressive about those, but natives are part of the flux and natural ebb and flow of what we see come and go, and so I think it's recognizing that and just realizing there are going to be a lot of those for a period, there'll come a time when they'll be back to a more manageable level.
I think it's fascinating that the drought is still having an impact out here. Is that normal? When would you maybe start to hope to finally heal from that 2012 impact?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about plant communities, they're very dynamic. They're not static, and so they change with moisture and precip and spring temperatures, and those are all things that I think we really don't understand from a large ecosystem standpoint, how they ebb and flow and move and change. But obviously, yes, we have had more annuals show up, and that's just part of the natural ecosystem we have.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to more resources on some of the topics we covered with Aaron, including dry lotting cows as an alternative to grazing pastures.